details. I say in my first book, 한국 교양 금지, in the introduction, I'm not a Korea expert. I've never said I'm a Korea expert, but I do consider myself a Korea connoisseur. I take knowledge and understanding that I amass and use it to enrich my own experience of Korea. And that's what you have to do, I think, to enjoy Korea on a non-touristic level. Foreigners who come and do the tourist activities, go to Gyeongbokgung, wear the hanbok, go to Gwangjang-Shijang, go to the DMZ, where I've never been myself. I've been to Imjingak, but not the sort of real DMZ. They, I think, feel like even if they enjoy it, I've seen Korea. And they haven't seen much of Korea, and I think they know that on some level, but the Korea packaged and made available to the foreigner who is not invested in Korea is very limited, is very strictly bounded. And you have to spend time here. And not just time, because, when I first came to Korea, I'd be shocked at foreigners who have been here 10, 20, 30 years. And not only did they not speak Korean, they didn't seem to have much curiosity. Korean culture is always more interesting, I think, you might disagree, when it's not directed outward. And I know you covered BTS's new album on this show recently, Arirang, and that was an interesting tension because, you look at the title, the very title, you think, well, this is going to get back to the Korean roots. And then you hear it, and it's like, this could be playing out of a lowrider in Florida. It's almost all in English. And one of the BTS members complained about that himself in the documentary promoting the thing. So whenever anything new comes around in Korea, usually if it's something that comes from elsewhere, if a sort of new wave of foreign restaurants appears or a new style of cafes, whatever it is, you go there and it'll be 95% women. And I think a lot of times in Korea, the men are content to do what they've always done, and it's the women who keep wanting to try new things. And so I would guess if you're really selling something on a Newtro basis, you want to target the women first, because they're the ones who are going to bite that hook more so than the men. Obviously, there are not as many forbidden subjects in Korea as there used to be, which might be one reason why the film culture is not seen as vital as it once was. The taboos are, for better or for worse, breaking down. And that's, maybe one thing that we're both witnessing in Korea now is what holds the society together when the taboos are not as strong as they used to be. People might think, obviously, Korea is going to be a united society because of its ethnic homogeneity. I don't think it's enough. Especially, Koreans joke about themselves. Like, you get 3 Koreans together, they form 5 political parties. This is not a united society. At the very least. So there are certain, and that's part of where these taboos come from. Why it's difficult to discuss history sometimes is it's seen as load-bearing. These certain ideas hold South Korea together and keep people united. And if you question them, we could have a problem. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's an idea that exists and has existed. Koreans sometimes ask when I give book talks, you say in 한국 교양 금지 that Koreans are more positive about the future than Americans. How could that be? And I always say, well, it has to do with technology. I think I got that because Koreans embrace technology as it comes in a way that Americans either don't or are hesitant to. Obama once said something about the US being like a big ocean liner that's hard to turn. You can't turn it much. This is more of a speedboat in South Korea. You can, for better or for worse, make a sharp turn. And I think you've seen in your time here, the society's made a few sharp turns, and it'll make some more, I suspect. There's a phrase in Korean, I'm sure you've heard it, 아는 만큼 보인다. So you see as much as you know. And I think if you don't know a lot, you don't see a lot. And Korea can be confusing or not that interesting, or it just won't engage you if you don't at least come with a little bit of knowledge built up or quickly get on amassing it.
We are back, and today we have Colin Marshall joining us for the second time. He was on a few years ago, and he's back. He's got a new book out, 2.5 books now written, one in English, one in Korean, and one part of an anthology. It's good to see you, Colin.
Good to see you. I've been waiting for 3 or 4 years for this invitation, and here it is.
We've seen each other in the meantime.
We have.
We've had some drinks. You've given my students a tour around parts of Seoul, which I was very grateful for.
That was fun.
It was fun indeed. My students loved it. For those not aware, Colin is a writer. He does wonderful stuff. I highly recommend him on all places of Twitter, because you post some good stuff there that doesn't get the attention it deserves, especially the essays I've been reading, and the essays come up in multiple languages these days.
They do. It's a good place to share essays or to find them to read, or there's no better one. I wouldn't say it's a good platform for it, but there's no alternative right now.
Well, one of the things that you do, you've written a book in Korean, and whereas people like me, I generally explain, in my writing at least, Korea to the West or Korea to the world. I do that in English through my weekly column and such forth, but you do something different, because you often explain Korean to Koreans, right? And you explain Korea to itself. I think that's very interesting, and you do so in normally very positive ways.
I think so. I sometimes get read as being more positive than I think I actually am. In some ways, I wonder if I'm even explaining. But yeah, some readings of my book, 한국 교약 금지, were surprisingly, how to put it, they saw a more unnuanced positivity than I think was actually there. I mean, in that book, I'm complaining about what I don't like about Korea, not in just the intro, but on the first page, and not just the first page, in the first paragraph. So if you miss that, it maybe wasn't a particularly close reading. But, I do find that if it's obvious that you are invested in Korea and that you want to live here, that you actively want to be here, I think you can get away, shall we say, with a lot of criticism as well, and still seem like you're, if not banging the drum, then at least positive. You have a worldview people would want to be spread of Korea.
Tell me something about writing in Korean for Korean people, how the response is and how people react to it, because it's a very niche thing.
I suppose you could say that. And you say writing in Korea for Korean people, and in my mind, those are very closely associated. If you're writing in Korean, you just assume your audience is Koreans. I mean, there have been foreigners who have read my book or my columns in Korean. Indeed, here's one right here. I think you represent a decent chunk of that audience, that segment of the audience. But, writing in Korean, you're always aware the writer is not Korean, because I know where I'm from, and the reader is going to be Korean. And so you can assume a lot of things. You can take a lot of things as given, and you can not explain a lot that you would have to, as you know, when writing for a foreign audience. And that's one reason why I think Korean literature, despite all the accolades it's received in recent years, has had a difficult time traveling, because every Korean novelist is writing for Koreans, practically, and they know what is shared knowledge. And so when you get a translation going, it's either going to be full of footnotes, which doesn't really work, or you're going to have to awkwardly get explanatory in the body of the text itself, and that doesn't work either. So this is why so many successes in Korean literature have been one-offs, if big one-offs sometimes. But writing I was going to say I don't write fiction, but we have an example of the first fictional story I've ever written in any language in this anthology, 그날 서울에서 무슨 일이, which I was sort of dragooned into. But I'm not one of these nonfiction writers who dreamed of being a novelist, dreamed of writing fiction. It was never really a serious interest for me. But writing fiction in Korean, I feel like in a way is easier than writing in English for me, fiction in English, because there's just so much accumulated baggage. Like, I read a lot of novels in English. I enjoy them. I never really thought of myself as a novelist in any sense in English. But in Korean, you kind of get around that psychologically, because it's often said, speaking or writing another language, not your own, you have an alter ego, you develop another personality. So maybe that guy, the Korean speaking and writing, Colin Marshall, can write fiction, heavily drawn from the reality that I've heard expressed by other foreigners in Korea, certainly. I mean, one reader said this was more like a sociological study than a mystery story, and I'll take that. I'll take it as a compliment. But that allowed me, you can get around certain hang-ups you might have if you're in another language. And that's true, as you know, just hanging out in conversation. You can say things, you can go down certain avenues you wouldn't be able to in your own country, in your own language. The same is true with writing. You just find yourself exploring avenues that didn't seem available to you when you're writing for people of your own language, or using your native language, which you often don't have a very critical relationship to, or you can't see very objectively, shall we say. You always feel like everybody, I think, feels like their native language describes reality as it is. And all the other ones, sure, they're doing their own thing out there. But I think when you get a sense that the language is standing apart from you, and you have to use it successfully to describe a kind of reality as you see it, it's a challenge, but a more interesting one in some ways. Limitations are an engine of creativity, and we're both, I assume, much more limited in Korean than in English.
Yeah.
And in a way, although it's a much slower process, it does unlock certain abilities you might not have realized you had otherwise.
There's a French author it might have been Derrida, who said that French is the language for science and truth, and English and German is for literature, because French more closely mirrors the thoughts. And it was just
the French sentiment.
Yeah, it's a wonderful idea, but that's how you think, and that's because you're French. And I'm sure English people and German would say the same about their own language. Also, the idea of writing in Korean, I feel like this, that in English I feel dwarfed or oppressed by the presence of Milton and Shakespeare and all of do you know what I mean by that?
You go that
it
far
weighs
back.
heavily.
Yeah, you're too aware.
Yeah, too
of
aware
the
of things. And in Korea, there's sort of a novelty. I also find that I've read your book. I've read Anton Schultz's book as well. 한국인들의 이상한 행복. And I find that I can read, I'm not sure if it's psychological, the Korean written by foreigners more easily sometimes than the Korean written by Koreans.
Yeah, I believe that. I think I've had that experience too, because we use Western modes of thinking, you should say.
Is that it? Is it psychological before we read, or is it something in the text?
You really want to get away from this, I guess, but you want to get away from translating in your head when you're speaking or writing. And that's what problem I think a lot of people trying to learn Korean or another foreign language have, is they're formulating in their native language what they want to say and then translating it. But unless you have such raw brain power, such raw horsepower in your mind that you can do that in real time, you're going to have a problem. So you just have to remember what you've heard people say in that language and sort of follow those lines. And with English, as you say, you're very aware of the finer shades of expression, and you can get tangled up in that. In Korean, we foreigners are all trying to just make ourselves understood. So we're not really trying to aim for these subtle nuances of meaning. We're not trying to hit the exact color name we need, of which there are very many in Korean. There's a lot of good enough in our writing, but people don't seem to mind that. Korean readers don't seem to mind that. If they understand you, if there are no actual ambiguities, Korean is a very ambiguous language, but if they're the kind of ambiguities they expect and not the kind that they don't expect, they'll be generous as readers. And I find with editors on my Korean projects, they get what I'm saying, and the changes are usually minimal. What gets published is typically pretty much what I send them, which can be scary sometimes.
That's what you want as a writer, though. You want help, you want some guidance. I wonder how you feel about this idea that I'm very conscious of cliche in English.
Oh, yes.
And I'm loath to go into cliche too much. But in Korean, I find like there are set expressions that you use and that you say. And, if it's cold, you say, and everybody says it. There's not a wonderful variation of chores when it's cold.
It's true. It's true. And now that I have kids, baby twins, I've been hearing a lot of, 이게 추워, 이게 춥겠다. There's a cliche right there. I mean, people always say the same things when they come up. And it's like, if you don't hear 예뻐라, if you don't hear 인형 같다, if you don't hear 이게 추워, you've not adhered to the form.
Yeah.
You're not, the conversation isn't going according to form in some way. But your use of the word cliche reminds me, a Korean teacher of mine, he would describe expressions as cliches using the French/English word in his Korean. And he would use it with a positive sense, like, cliché, as in, you should use this because it's a cliche and it's more expressive for being a cliche.
It's like some wisdom.
I know, and that took a while to get over, but it's fun to use. It's fun to use these expressions in Korean, especially sajasongo, the four Chinese character expressions. I like learning those and deploying them whenever and wherever I can. No one seems to be tired of them, no matter how much you use them. And that's one way to further your Korean is to learn those. But it is a different mode of thinking, and as well, writing in English, you're very conscious of not repeating words, right?
Yeah.
You sound incompetent if you keep using the same words over and over again. You've got to vary it up. In Korean, people don't really care. Though I try to transpose that quality of my writing in English to Korean as well, because you do want it to sound a little foreign, not awkward, not ungrammatical, certainly, but you do want to convey that you're you're not just another Korean writer. Why would you want to come off as just a Korean who happens to look like a foreigner? I think about this with English as Koreans have learned it in the past. This is kind of cooling down, but they spent so much time on accent reduction, which is time wasted if your grammar isn't that good, first of all.
And alien to French and Spanish and Italian people who speak English with their accents.
To them. They have no problem, typically.
Yeah.
And then learning, I'll come back to idioms. You'd see people going around, do you remember, with these big books of English idioms?
It's not my cup of tea.
Yes, exactly. And these idioms I would hear in America once every 3 years. They're memorizing it. Your eye's not on the ball at that point. Yeah. But again, it can help. And I think with writing, deploying, the well-deployed cliche in either language can be satisfying.
Yeah. I become incredibly conscious when I'm writing in Korean of how many 생각합니다s I've used, especially as the verb ending.
You can change that up.
Yes, absolutely.
It offers options.
And the 사자성어는 nice. I don't think neronambul is one, but that sort of, I like how they would produce these every year. This is the four Chinese characters that we believe and the professors will get together that best defines the year that we've gone through. And it's normally a reflection on the dirtiness and corruption and grime of politics, isn't it?
Right,
more than anything.
Korean blood sport.
Or the lack of virtue. Maybe can we go into something about Korean literature or writing and books? Because you said something about how when Koreans are writing in Korean for Korean people, and I'll just park that there because in my Hallyu work, I described the difference between K content and Korean content.
Ah, yes.
Very simply, K content is designed for export and it is designed with an international audience in mind. But Korean content are the dramas, the music, the movies, the books that are written primarily for the domestic audience. And there are ones in between that sort of filter.
It's a spectrum.
It is a spectrum. And so that if it is a spectrum, it means there must be one that is more Korean than the other.
There must be. Everything gets put on that line somewhere.
And you said that when Koreans are writing for Koreans, they don't have to explain things. They don't have to explain Minyo and Yujeha and all of these things.
They might have to explain Yujeha to anyone under about 40 at this point.
But that idea, can we pick up on that or pick up on the idea of writing or novels, hanggang or something that you pick up in this?
I am not a translator, although I did study translation at the Hanguk Munhak Bonyeokwan. LTI, Literature Translation Institute of Korea, I think it is, in English. I met my wife there. She's a translator. And yet I've come to distrust translation in some way. I've kept this quote with me. Jay Rubin, I interviewed him years ago. He's Haruki Murakami's translator, one of them, the main one in English. And he said, when you're reading Murakami, who's huge here in Korea, as you know, when you're reading Murakami, you're reading me at least 80% of the time, which is a blunter way than a lot of translators will put it. But coming from a language like Japanese, and similarly with Korean, you're really doing you're writing something new, I would say, because no two translators are going to get a very similar result, or no two large language models, or whatever it's going to be, because so much is left out, and so much it depends on background knowledge, which can even vary among Koreans. And so, when I say I distrust translation, I don't mean I don't like translated literature or that it's wrong to do it. I mean that I think it's something else. I think the original and the translation are two different works now. And the translation could be better. Like I'm perfectly willing to allow that possibility that you can improve upon an original in translation. And some say it has been done with Korean literature before, or at least been made more appealing to a broader audience. And some say you have to do that with Korean literature. But I do think that maybe we'll see this acknowledged more in the age of AI. Not that this is not a topic done to death already, but the role of a translator in making something new. They're not just a functionary when it comes to literature. They're actually a creator, and I think this has already been true. Translations, they stand and fall not on faithfulness, not on how well even the translator has understood the original work, but how good a writer the translator is.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really it. You can have a bare bones grasp of the original language. If you can write a good book, you could have a hit translation, and the readers aren't going to care. when you get down to it. Some will, but the great mass of readers, if you have a bestseller, they're not really thinking, is this faithful to the original? Is this really what the Korean says? They don't care. And I think a lot about, if not literary translation, the differences between English and Korean as languages and as mindsets. But I accept that. Readers, if they don't have any intention of learning Korean, it's not a big deal to them if you're sort of getting inventive.
Probably the most famous example might be, or at least the one that my mind goes to, would be Hangang's, in English it's called Human Acts. In Korean, 소년이 온다. A little boy is coming.
The titles almost never make it.
And you like, wow, the difference between those two. I mean, Human Acts, you're expecting going into that book to read something and you realize it's about Gwangju and democracy and
right.
It calls to something, human rights and noble acts and humanity. And then in Korean, 소년이 온다. A boy is coming.
It sets the tone very differently.
Different.
That's true. I think of a novel in translation I recommend often. I think I did. We were getting together with some other Korean literature enthusiasts months ago, and I was saying I just don't know what to recommend in translation, in English translation, to people who want to read Korean literature. But I usually go to Kim Yong-ha's book, Bitche Cheguk, which is literally Empire of Light, and uses that painting as its cover, well, I would say, in Korean, and is Your Republic is Calling You in English, about a North Korean sleeper agent in Seoul, which everybody I recommend it to loves. And I think it was written in part with an eye toward getting an international audience.
Okay.
Not in a bad way, but I think Kim Yong-ha's aware of that. He's aware of the global readership and has been published in English a few times now. But that did seem like you get some over-literalization sometimes with the translations of titles into English. I would have kept it Empire of Light, personally, and kept the cover, the English cover. I mean, it's just... I understand. They want to emphasize the North Korea thing because that sells. This is about North Korea. You might learn something about, at the time, Kim Jong-il or whatever. But, I'm just living here. We've talked about this before, but living here in South Korea, you get sick of hearing about the North and you're not even into, I don't know about you, but it's just like, I was fascinated by North Korea in college. I would always look up eagerly any scrap of information or photos of the Pyongyang metro. It was like this, it was such a rare thing, so tantalizing. And now it's just like, maybe I've taken on the South Korean apathy toward the whole thing. That's possible.
Because the apathy is real. And I recently did Jonathan Cheng from the Wall Street Journal's new book. And when I got it and was sent it as a review copy to read, and it's a big tome, and it's called Korean Messiah, and it's got a big picture of Kim Il-sung, and it's about how it's all North Korea is Christian, and I put it off for a while, and I finally picked it up, and it's all about late Joseon dynasty, Western missionaries, daily life in Pyongyang, and I loved it.
That's an interesting
2/3
subject.
of the book is about that, and you can see, just for the international audience, they've called it North Korea and Kim Il-sung and Messiah, and I was like, the book is...
Inside the prison state of Kim
Yeah.
Il-sung.
And so when I saw some reviews online about the book in the New York Times and things, I thought, you actually haven't read this because it's not about North Korea. It's about the Joseon dynasty and Western missionaries. And,
that's actually, I kind of want to read it now when you've described it that way.
It's very good. I learned a lot. I highly recommend it. And I went in with low expectations, was blown away. Before we get to your book, just if we stay on books, I reread recently Kim Yong-ha's I Have the Right to Destroy Myself.
Oh, his first novel,
and
yes.
I didn't like it. I found it kind of Murakami light and I don't know, kind of existential teen angst. I wasn't drawn to it as perhaps, maybe I've got older, maybe it's not the book's fault, maybe it's mine. I normally recommend Whale. I really enjoyed
that translation is good. I wrote a review of that translation and revisited the original and everything, and then it got killed, the piece. So there's a few months I'll never get back, but it was still fun to do it. It was still it was an exercise I would have maybe done anyway.
Yeah. Chon Myung, the author, has gone from my
Chang Gang-myung.
Okay, yeah. But definitely, if anybody wants to read Korean literature, that's one I go to. I liked Kim Un-soo's Plotters.
There's been a big, there was a thriller boom, like a crime fiction boom. I think it's still fizzing on, but that was Korean genre literature got to be fairly big in translation, but it's also fairly placeless. And some of these books, not necessarily that one, but they could be taking place anywhere. And I noticed this with
that one particular, I think.
Park Chan-wook's new movie, 어쩔 수가 없다. No Other Choice, I think it was in English. Watching the whole thing, and I've heard Korean friends echo this, it really didn't feel like it was taking place in Korea.
Where are those houses?
Where are the houses? I mean,
it's based on an American
It's based on a
novel,
Donald Westlake novel.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
If you know that, you can see what's going on. Oh, and it was adapted before by Costa Gavras. I think it was set in like Belgium or France, and at least it was the West. But it was interesting, actually, the Park Chan-wook version, because it was clearly an attempt to keep it as Western as possible, but also be in Korea. And it was kind of on the wrong side of plausibility, but just on the wrong side. I enjoyed it. But you notice how reviews here weren't very good. In the West, people loved it. It's like, oh, he's back. The Masters, this is his best yet.
He never went away.
He never went away. But in Korea, people are sort of, I think they weren't buying it. Maybe they just felt the setting was wrong.
I'm not sure that Park Chan-wook always has the best, he doesn't fill the cinemas. Maybe that's it. But there were Korean elements like the Choyoung Pil song going for the whole sort of 4 or 5 minutes. At times it was
un-Korean.
Incredibly Korean, but then you've got them dancing as Mulan or Pocahontas or something. It's farcical and wonderful. I think Park Chan-wook is a genius. I thought it was a very good movie.
None of his movies are, you never watch them and think, I want those 2 hours back.
No.
You usually want to see them again. And even if you were kind of on the fence about them, you still want to see them again for that reason.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Na Hong-jin has a new movie coming out at the moment, Hope, with Hwang Jong-min.
I didn't know.
Huge. He did The Wailing. The Chaser, so I love him. I can't wait to see that. But it has, I think it's Michael Fassbender.
Really?
He's blurring the lines between East and West, and so
there's only one foreign actor, and it's him, or
I think so. Yeah,
that's intriguing.
It is intriguing
because it's kind of the inverse of what Korean filmmakers, high-profile Korean filmmakers, were doing like 10 years ago, where they were going to the West and making a movie, and they might involve a Korean actor or two, but it was basically Western with Korean elements, none of which worked. I would say. Almost without exception. Right. And here it's, okay, maybe bring a famous Westerner in, but keep it Korean for the most part, which has a better chance of working. I will at least say that.
It would be really hard to do a list of the top 10 best foreign performances in Korean movies.
I mean, a bottom 10 would be easier.
Yeah, a bottom 10 would be much easier.
I think that there's no floor, though. It just keeps getting lowered.
It's so hard, and when you would get to, I would go to probably like Tang Wei in Heojil Kyoshi, Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave. There's a Chinese
obviously
woman.
That's good, yeah.
And you'll find the Japanese actor in Goksong, The Wailing. But if you're looking for white guys or Westerners or white women, people like that, wow, it's incredibly difficult.
I'll tell you a story that was very illuminating for me about that. There was a movie in 1993, a Korean movie called Western Avenue, which is a street in Los Angeles. And I lived pretty much on it when I lived in Koreatown before coming to Korea. And this movie is about the riots that happened the year before, so quickly made. It came out the next year by a sort of, I forget his name, but a fairly auteur director of that time. And they shot it mostly in the US, and it was sort of about this Korean-American woman who she moves to New York away from her convenience store owning family in Los Angeles and comes back when the riots happen. Not an uninteresting premise, but there is the most prominent foreign American cast member. It's set in America, but the guy is her boyfriend, her white boyfriend, who has a mullet, sort of a balding mullet, and he has lines like, and I want to get this verbatim. He has I'm going to try to do the delivery as well.
Yeah.
You are my oriental wildflower. Why have you discarded your ideals of male superiority? This is straight delivered too, humorlessly. And I found the guy. I found the actor.
I'm going to clip that, by the way.
Yes. That's what's going to circulate on TikTok.
Yeah.
Me asking why you've discarded your ideals, your oriental ideals of male superiority. And this guy, Josh Stolberg is his name. He makes like 3D horror movies and things these days. Yeah. And I emailed him and we had a back and forth about what was going on this movie. Yeah. And he was saying, I was trying to get into acting in those days. It wasn't my bag ultimately, but they said this Korean movie's coming to town, directors respected, they need a white guy to play the boyfriend. We think you could do it. And so he goes in and he says on the set, this was his telling, he tried to give more internal performances, tried to express emotions in a subtle fashion. But the director, through his interpreter, just kept saying, more, bigger, bigger, bigger. And sure enough, what takes made it into the final product.
Yeah.
And as you know, when this happens, they always clash with the Korean acting. Even if the Korean acting is big, it's not big in the same way. And need I point to Okja for anybody who's seen that knows, you watch that thinking, I wonder if Jake Gyllenhaal's agent or Tilda Swinton's agent tried to stop this from coming out.
Mickey 17, similarly.
I never saw that.
Yeah.
But somehow the performances of Westerners don't really come across in the same way, I guess, to Korean audiences or filmmakers. And when you get them two together, it's just oil and water for the most part. So maybe if it's minority Westerner, they'll be okay. I mean, this guy, Josh Stolberg, the actor, was saying, I made peace with it by saying, Asians were stereotyped in Hollywood movies. Yeah. So now I'm just being stereotyped in an Asian movie. It's okay. And then he went on to another filmmaking career. But he clearly had some regrets that because he said the director was nice. The actress was, she's someone big. I forget the name, but he was saying she was nice. She didn't speak English. So playing a Korean American was very difficult. And she was obviously struggling. But this was an example of a Korean movie that was not made for foreign consumption. And you drew that distinction earlier. And it's one I think about a lot. Most novels have not been written in Korea for export. And this is such an export-oriented society. That's how it made the miracle on the Han, the economic miracle by exporting, that you sort of value what is not made to export. I got to know Korea a little bit to begin with at a Korean restaurant I write about in the Newtro book called Hosuni. And in those days, in 2000 or whatever it was, you'd go to a Korean restaurant and everybody was Korean, almost all the time. They just were not for non-Koreans. And they'd be almost surprised to see a non-Korean. And there'd be sort of mixed families there. But that's one reason why Korean food, I think, has stayed good, at least until recently in the West, is because the restaurants, which overextend themselves because they try to do every dish.
Except here they just do one.
They do one, and that's how a restaurant should be. They serve one thing and you all eat it together. But, the average Korean restaurant in the West, it's got everything. And, maybe you do the Ojungo Bokum well, the Nakji Bokum, whatever. Maybe you don't do the galbijim so well. But they try to cover the waterfront in the very American restaurant way. Whereas, I just prefer it when it's specialized and specialized for Korean customers as well. It's always... Korean culture is always more interesting, I think, you might disagree, when it's not directed outward.
Absolutely.
And I know you covered BTS's new album on this show recently, Arirang, and that was an interesting tension because, you look at the title, the very title, you think, well, this is going to get back to the Korean roots. And then you hear it, and it's like, oh, this could be playing out of a lowrider in Florida. It's almost all in English.
Yep.
And one of the BTS members complained about that himself in the documentary promoting the thing. So clearly there's some dissatisfaction about that. But also, I think in that documentary, a higher up tells him immediately thereafter, oh, well, this has to play to a global market, so it's got to be in English, which is itself a very Korean idea, ironically, that global equals English. But that's, you see certain cultural products going a bit too far. And I wonder if K-pop culture or Hallyu culture is going to kill the golden goose at some point with that. Because if you get too global, anybody can replicate what you're doing. And what made Korean popular culture or non-popular culture appealing for those who like it, for foreigners who like it, is that it is for Koreans. And if you share those tastes to some degree, you'll like it too. But I do think that this is going to be a problem. That just trying to reach too far. Overreach will be a problem for Korean culture.
It was very telling that BTS's song Swim, which again is all in English, disappeared off the top of the top 5 quite quickly and was replaced by Akdong Music, Akmu, different 404 Kikis. And the music here and K-pop here is listened to and it is still cool and they like it, but it's not necessarily the stuff that is designed for export. It's so hard to find BTS fans at a Korean university.
Is it?
When we did the conversation, people,
you had to dig deep for that?
But I couldn't even during the conversation, we were sort of like being nicer than we could have been, I think. It was this kind of, well, let's be a little bit respectful. And so there was that tension there, absolutely. I think coming towards your book, and you did a lovely segue here, and we should talk about it. For anybody listening, Korean Newtro.
Where Youth Meets Tradition.
Where Youth Meets Tradition by Colin Marshall.
New from Halim.
With photos by Yoon Kwang-jun.
Yeah, he was supposed to come to our launch party, but he couldn't make it. I was excited to meet him because the photos, I think, are pretty good. And the design is well done, I think. I didn't do those parts.
Without the photos, this book is half... I don't mean to disparage your writing.
I don't think I would write it if it weren't going to have photos.
But the photos and the presentation gives it a certain character, because sometimes you pick up books and it is just that, it's a book. But this is a presentation, and I think because of the things that you're writing about, the changing of culture over time, and more particularly, I mean, my family members pick up the book and flick through it. And
are they ones who remember these things or ones who don't, or both?
Both, but primarily the ones that remember these things. They're of my generation. They're in their late 40s and 50s. And so to them, they were looking at that and thinking, there's a foreigner writing about our youth. And
yeah, I guess that's distinctive. They plan to bring this book out in Korean, the publisher. And in fact, a translation has been written.
Yeah.
But what they're going to do with it, I'm not sure. And I'm curious to see if that will happen. And maybe I'd like to sort of change things if I were thinking of the Korean audience. I don't know.
Well, let's start with this because I read it and congratulations on getting this latest book done.
Thank you.
And I learned things from it. I enjoyed it. I was telling
you've been here longer than I have, so that's
indeed. But let's start with this tension between 촌스럽다 and 멋지다. I think that's the best place to start.
I referenced that word a whole lot, 촌스럽다, and I knew it early on, and you sort of get, when you're trying to get a grasp on Korean words early on, you'll ask Koreans what these words mean in English or whatever the language you're speaking in is. And I find 촌스럽다, Koreans are very willing to guess at a translation, but none of the words they use in English seem to capture the meaning as you understand it when you live in Korea. They'll say it means old-fashioned, it means tacky, it means outdated, it means like countrified. It means, have you heard any others? People sort of explaining 촌스럽다, they'll say some frumpy sometimes. I mean, these words you can see kind of what they're getting at, one facet, but
the key would be the 촌.
The key is the 촌, which as you know means village. 촌스럽다 means literally village-like. And yes, words don't always mean only their literal etymology-related meanings, but I do think that's important to emphasize. It's like the village. It's not like the city. It's like the place you came from to come to the city where things are modern. It's like the place, 촌스러워. It's like what's going on in the provinces where they're not keeping up with the changes in the modern world. So you see why they get outdated. And it's not what they're doing in Seoul, literally or metaphorically. And so I realized 촌스러워, like this word, it was being also applied to things that I liked in Korea. And they're not, even Koreans are not necessarily saying it's bad if it's 촌스러워, but it's sort of undesirable. It's like publicly undesirable, You see the way that older Koreans dress sometimes, or the music they listen to. If you go hiking, you might see a 75-year-old guy in a very 촌스러운 type fashion, listening to 촌스러운 trot music on his headphoneless radio, things like that. Or, I mentioned that Korean restaurant Hosuni where I went in high school, and I was very intrigued by all the sort of details there and the ambience and the way it didn't seem like my conceptions of China or Japan, which are the Asian cultures known best in the West at that time. And partially it was the touch of 촌스러움 that I appreciated. I took home a calendar one time from that restaurant with 딱종이 인형. You know those things? They're the mulberry paper dolls.
Okay. Yes. And they feature in the book with the very
huge heads
faces
and sort of They have these cartoonish expressions and these rubbery limbs, and they're often representing some sort of rural life scenes. It's more cultural memory now than living memory, but the way these dolls looked was so unusual to me because they just didn't seem to come from any culture I knew. And I think a lot of Koreans would consider 딱종이 인형, the essence of 촌스러움 in some way. But to me, they had a certain there was a rusticity, but like the sensibility was all, it had a vitality as well. And I guess vitality is a word I tend to come back to in English as well. As there is a vitality in Korea that I think foreigners tap into that they don't in many other Asian countries. And I've been here a decade, but I'm still trying to understand what I sort of get out of that, or what that comes from. But yeah, 촌스러워, the things that are 촌스러워 are now becoming 멋져. They're becoming cool. And that's a lot of what Newtro is about. Things that were 촌스러워, dismissed as 촌스러워, are now becoming, or have become, gone through the cycle of being cool again. They're doing it in Seoul.
Forgive me for saying, but your jacket might be an example of that, wouldn't
that right?
it? Well, during the 80s.
This is pretty old.
During the 80s, I mean, the idea of wearing a denim jacket was very cool during the 80s. And I think then during sort of the 90s and 2000s, it went out. It was replaced more by hip-hop fashion. And there were also associations with sort of secret police and chongchong fashion.
I think so. And, I'll point to your jacket as well, which I like because I think brown jackets look pretty good, but for a while there, it was like an illegal color to wear. Do you remember in the 90s, like would anybody be wearing brown?
No, my mind just immediately goes to Obama nearly getting cancelled for wearing tan.
Yes, exactly. So that's it was in the 2000s. So these come back, like the colors themselves, the designs themselves, the textures are not bad, but they're just, it's relative to where the culture is. And in the 20th century, fashions were pretty strong. Like one thing was going on, and you couldn't deviate much from that. Thinking about Newtro, thinking about this book, writing the book, got me thinking about how nostalgia works. And in the US where I'm from, I thought back to the waves of nostalgia that I had seen happen in the popular culture. And the first one I was aware of was the 1970s revival of the 1990s, which I assume in England was much the same. And you had the sitcom That 70s Show, which I watched despite not having been alive in the 70s. But I could tell these things were fun. 70s stuff is kind of fun now. These fashions that seem ridiculous, but there's something there. There's something at least entertaining there, or these sort of old video games, or the cars. Like there was a vitality, again, I'll come back to that word, that wasn't present in the 90s. The 90s had moved so far away from that. And you mentioned the 80s. Funny thing, like 80s nostalgia is pretty big, I would think.
Stranger Things, The Weeknd.
Stranger Things, yeah.
And 808s.
Young people, I'm old enough to be able to speak of young people now. Yeah. Youngsters, 30-year-olds, I've seen this posted on, say, Twitter. I saw almost exactly this. Someone said, why has everyone always loved the 80s? Why has there always been 80s nostalgia? And I was thinking, hang on.
No.
In the 90s and the sort of turn of the millennium, I was very much into 80s culture, and you kind of had to hide it because nothing could have been less cool. Like you would become almost a social pariah if you were too sort of, you were ahead of your time in a way. I could say self-flatteringly if you liked the 80s in 2000, because by 2010, everyone did.
But post Nevermind, post Cobain, and that was a cultural turning point. I think
that was
globally,
a cultural turning point. And I didn't really get with the whole alternative rock movement, even though I lived in the suburbs of Seattle at that time, because alternative became the most popular genre on the radio. So I feel like there was a real contradiction that I couldn't get past there. But you had to, if you were listening to 80s music, you had to sort of turn it down a bit, and people weren't into it. So it has not always been revived, but it's somehow stuck. Now it's like all eras. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, but any era is up for reevaluation. You can use everything. There's not just like in the 90s, you could be with the present, or you could revive the 70s. That was about it. Or in the 70s, you could revive the 50s, or you could be at the disco, as I understand it. Nowadays, like the revival is perpetual and of all eras, but seemingly.
I've often thought, and maybe this is rose-tinted, that growing up in the 90s, there was almost amongst my cohorts a distaste for the past. Of course, we wanted to wear like 70s shirts and things like that, and I liked Hendrix, but there was this idea that we go forward. There was a future. There was like, things are going to get better. Wars are ending, gay marriage is coming. These kind of things. It felt like there was a future coming, and we were living on the cusp of it. And I'm not sure there's the sense of that now.
Yeah, there isn't. I wrote a piece recently on your countryman, David Bowie, and I re-listened through all his stuff again and read a bunch of books on him. And David Bowie was, toward the end of the 20th century, just very excited about what was to come. And his work started to center around just how life will change and how it will be completely different in the 21st century. And he himself said, I'm very disappointed. None of the changes I thought would come have come. Yeah. And he saw the first sort of 16 years of the new millennium, and I don't know how much he would approve of the last 10 years. Maybe he went out at the right time. Yeah. But this is, Bowie's an example of an artist who was always aware of what was going on in the culture and what could be revived. You could say, without revival of the past, he would not have succeeded without that instinct of what you could bring back from, Weimar era Berlin or whatever it might be. He could draw from everything. And at that time, you didn't have access directly to the past. You couldn't pull up YouTube and watch a commercial from 1976. The past was in the past, and you had to dig it out. And it could be pretty easily made fresh to your peers because they couldn't just look it up. You had to find it.
Now, that's what I was trying to say by the past is heavy. Because we have so much of it at our fingertips, Bowie did a wonderful interview with Jeremy Paxman, I think, in the 1990s for BBC. You know the one where he's talking about internet and culture and how things are changing. And he was just a man who had his finger on the pulse. Drawing this back to Korea and your book here, you find a love in Korea of Korean things that other people don't notice. So a lot of time, and this is with no disrespect, when people come here, they'll go to the landmark sites, they'll tick these off, and they'll go and stand by the K-pop entertainment company and go to Namsan. And that's wonderful because that's what they find. But you walk the streets, you sit in the restaurants, you watch the Korean television, and you seem to find a beauty that Koreans used to find, the beauty in themselves, or perhaps they're not missing. And so I want to try to focus on that aspect. And I think you know what I'm asking you, but it's almost like seeing the unseen. It's paying attention to things that people don't notice. It's a sensitivity to aesthetic. Can you say something about that, please?
Well, you bring this up at an interesting time or an opportune time, because I recently had a bit of a brush with virality by my modest standards on Twitter when I retweeted something a Korean big influencer had already gone viral with. So this was sort of echo virality, but he posted 2 screenshots from TikTok, and I should send you an image of this tweet so people can see. You can splice it in. The video was probably shot by a foreigner, non-Korean, and a video of a sort of Korean street with the text, "South Korea is waiting for us." And it was just a normal street, kind of like the neighborhood I live in, not very wealthy, kind of a hilly street, moderately hilly.
It's so viral, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about. I figured you would. Yeah. And so he, this influencer, I didn't know of him before, quoted it, and he said in Korean, but he said essentially, "Foreigners have given this 400,000 likes." Wing? You know that expression? Wing? Koreans have this sort of surprised incredulity. Wing? Yeah, because to him, this was a normal street in a not particularly glamorous area. But I've been here, even though I've been here 10 years, I got it. That's what I said when I retweeted. I do get the romance of this street. And, some Koreans replying said, "Oh, this is probably because they see them in K-dramas," which I don't really watch. So it wasn't my case. I understand that, though. I've asked Europeans before, why the obsession with America over there? And they say, because we see it in the movies, which makes sense. If you grew up watching a lot of movies that come from one particular country, when you go to that country, as he said, you'll feel like you just cut open the movie screen and stepped inside. And, I've heard the English writer Jonathan Rabin has said, Englishmen kind of get a certain psychosis sometimes just stepping into America, and everything looks like it does on the American shows and the films, and you can't really handle it sometimes. But the K-drama explanation is one. And last night, I was walking around for about an hour in my part of town to pick up things my wife had bought on Dangun Market, the app for buying and selling, because we have babies, as I said, and it's very good for baby stuff. But I enjoy doing this because you get to go to residential neighborhoods you've never seen. You get to go into buildings to pick up the item. You don't see the homes, but you sort of get a feel for how people live in neighborhoods that you might not know at all, even though they're next to you.
It's rare to see people's homes.
It's rare to see people's homes, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I really, I could hardly enjoy this sort of thing more, walking around at night and just seeing all of on the Korean streets, the typologies of housing are always fascinating. And that sounds maybe pretty dull to some people. Architecture and urbanism is an interest of mine. And Korean architecture, non-traditional Korean architecture, is not much celebrated, I will say. And sometimes for seemingly good reason. Like a lot of these residential buildings are modest at best architecturally. But if you know how to look at them, you can tell when they're from. First of all, housing comes in very defined generations. And you can tell what was sort of going on in the period of Korean history when they were built. And you can see how they've evolved over time. Additions have been made, and the design choices can often be very 촌스러워. They can be eccentric. You have these fake half timbers. The picket fence sections that get put over windows and they're like slanting outward. I've never heard those explained to my satisfaction, but there's all these details you can look at, and you can become a connoisseur of these details. I say in my first book, 한국 교약 금지, in the introduction, I'm not a Korea expert. I've never considered myself, I've never said I'm a Korea expert, but I do consider myself a Korea connoisseur. I take knowledge and understanding that I amass and use it to enrich my own experience of Korea. And that's what you have to do, I think, to enjoy Korea on a non-touristic level. Foreigners who come and do the tourist activities, go to Gyeongbokgung, wear the hanbok, go to Gwangjang-Shijang, go to the DMZ, where I've never been myself. I've been to Imjingak, but not the sort of real DMZ. They, I think, feel like even if they enjoy it, I've seen Korea. And they haven't seen much of Korea, and I think they know that on some level. But the Korea packaged and made available to the foreigner who is not invested in Korea is very limited, is very strictly bounded. And you have to spend time here. And not just time, because, when I first came to Korea, I'd be shocked at foreigners who have been here 10, 20, 30 years. And not only did they not speak Korean, they didn't seem to have much curiosity about what was even going on around them, or they didn't know their way around Seoul very well still. So you have to have reasons to get out there and to master the places you go. And it's a work in progress. I lived in Los Angeles, as I say, and it was 4 years there before I came to Korea. And I feel like if you dropped me at a random location in Los Angeles, I would know where I was. Here in Seoul, that's much less likely. Here, where we're recording, this neighborhood, I think I've never set foot in. But I was glad to have the excuse. And there are many foreigners living here who complain, Seoul, it all looks the same. Everything's ugly. And you get on the train and you ride for 2 hours and you get out, and the neighborhood you got out is exactly the same as the one you got in. And I understand why they think that. But it doesn't take much intellectual or aesthetic investment or emotional investment to get past that. It helps to be able to read the signs, which they usually can't do, or only with great difficulty. But there's a phrase in Korean, I'm sure you've heard it, 아는 만큼 보인다. So you see as much as you know. And I think if you don't know a lot, you don't see a lot. And Korea can be confusing or not that interesting, or it just won't engage you if you don't at least come with a little bit of knowledge built up or quickly get on amassing it.
If you don't have the cultural knowledge to know that singer died in a car crash after only releasing one album,
I guess so. Yeah.
It changes how you perceive the song, I think. And we have that. We mentioned sort of Kurt Cobain or Hendrix. We have this knowledge about people that affects their position in our culture, and Koreans will have that as well. The person that I went to see Lee Hee-moon with, Elizabeth, a Minyo performance at the National Theatre last week. She'd been here for 3 weeks. It was her third visit, and she, over makguksu afterwards and makgeolli, she told me with such joy that I got to stay in a Korean house, and we were just like walking around in our underwear together and washing our hair, and it was that amazed her most of all the things she'd done in this 3 weeks. It wasn't the DMZ, it wasn't the Palace tour, it was that sort of lived experience. And I think when you talk about being a connoisseur of Korea, and I that's what I like about this book, by the way, because it does explain things. I think it requires curation. And so in that sense, could you perhaps curate some things? You've because Koreans send people to the DMZ and the Gyeongbokgung
Yeah.
because they think the other things are 촌스러워,
촌스러워.
that Westerners or foreign people are not going to be interested in them. Could you maybe like bring to life some of these things, like a little curated, the sounds, the movies, the music?
Well, one example that comes to mind is Seoul-sanga, the building or the complex of buildings that I took your students to a few months ago. Students visiting Korea for, what was it, a 2-week program?
Yeah.
So they all had some curiosity about Korea. And explaining this sort of mega structure built in the 1960s that was an electronics market, but then expanded and also has sort of luxury housing by the 60s standards. Now it's falling apart, and there's controversy over whether to even keep the thing up. But then there's a new wave of Newtro businesses, coffee shops, restaurants, but also a Dabang I like very much, an old-style cafe. And, you keep looking, you find all kinds of things in there. I think that's one experience that foreigners don't tend to get, going to a place like Seoul-sanga, where you do, again, have to spend time, and usually there's no one to guide you. So you're kind of on your own for the most part. Or if you want the touristic version of that, there's Ikseondong, which is not far from Seoul-sanga, the north side of Jongno-samga station, where most of the tourists are Koreans, though. And most of them are Seoulites, but it is a converted 1930s urban hanok residential development where those hanok have become businesses, cafes, restaurants, bars. There's even a pretty good French restaurant in there. But if you're looking for sort of forms of media as well, you mentioned the singer who died in a car crash at 25, Yoo Jae-ha. I'm often how to put it, seen as the foreigner who likes Yoo Jae-ha. If I meet a Korean who knows who I am, sometimes they'll bring up that, I saw you in that video where you talked about Yoo Jae-ha. And this is just one of those things that foreigners don't know about him. Yeah. And increasingly young Koreans don't know about him either. So he did a lot to shape the Korean ballad as it took shape from the late 1980s on. And he has one album, 사랑하기 때문에, which I enjoy a lot. More so than most new releases in Korea, though I haven't dug particularly deep there. And what kind of, what genre of things are we recommending? What form of things are we recommending here? Besides, we've got a building, we've got a neighborhood, we've got an album. Is there anything in particular, any type of thing in particular we should be concentrating on?
About a Dabang for me, because there was a Facebook post on a group, and somebody sort of was lamenting how Dabangs were places of prostitution, and I typed a comment as if to say there are different types of Dabang, and not all Dabangs are like that. And I think they deleted my comment and blocked me.
It's a strange thing to complain about in this era.
Yeah, but a Dabang, and we went to a Dabang together, and I've been to quite a few, and they're exactly what you're describing in your book. I think you're pointing to something, and a Dabang is a wonderful symbol of this. And I think some people might not know what it is.
It's what was here before current coffee shops. So what was here before Starbucks came, essentially, in the late 1990s. You had decades of the Dabang, which the Chinese characters, the Hanja, I think it's just like tea room, that kind of thing. Or a meaning like that. But it's where Koreans would drink their instant coffee, typically. Although not always. Some of them would sort of grind beans and do the whole thing for real. But the decor is what you might notice first, with these grandfather clocks and the chairs with antimacassars on the back with the phone number that's only 6 digits of the cafe, or maybe they're up to 7 on some of them. There's certainly a vibe there, to use modern parlance, but it does feel like they feel very like private spaces, you could say. They don't feel like public cafes, and oftentimes they are in the basement. Or they're not on the first floor usually. They're not on the first floor. And so you feel like you're entering another separate social reality, especially because often the average age is quite high. Most customers are regulars, but they won't turn you away if you're not a regular. Or if you're a foreigner, in my experience, they'll be curious, to see you there. They'll serve sangwacha, the traditional tea full of sort of seeds, and with an egg yolk as well in there. You can't have it without the egg yolk, I would say. This is essential Korea right there. And they're they express the personality of their owners typically. And it's usually there's just the one older lady running it, or maybe two in most cases. But have I covered the details of what you see a Dabang as being? Is there anything else?
I think that's it. And I just want people that have never maybe Googled Dabang to do that and to do and see a tea with an egg floating in the top, because it's not something that you're going to see often. And what I like about the Dabangs is that they're not, I think because they remind me of like my grandmother's house or something.
There is a grandmotherly aesthetic.
There is a grandmotherly aesthetic, and they're not uniform in a way. So when you mentioned a sofa, you might find a sofa over here, but there's a sofa over there. There's not one in this room, but that doesn't look like this one. And there's something over there that doesn't look like it belongs.
Everything's a bit mismatched.
Yeah, and that's what I like about them. They're not uniform. They're personal.
There is a form of like how a dabang should be culturally, what people expect, but within that, many variations. And this is maybe what I was getting at with the residential buildings in Korea. There are a certain set number of forms, and every generation had its own, but infinite little variations within those forms. And so if you only see the form, you never see any variety.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I loved the design, the Palpa, the 88 Olympics one, the poster that you feature. I nearly put it on my Twitter the other day, and I thought I'd wait till I see you, because I looked at it and it just looks so, and this is a design that they did for the Olympics here, and it looks so cool and so modern.
It looks like it could be today.
I was immediately drawn to it, and wanted to share it with people to say, this is fantastic.
The 88 Olympics are their own design movement, you could say here. Much like the 84 Olympics in Los Angeles was really this quintessential, a lot of 80s design as we think of it is from the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, with the sort of pastel colors and torn paper edges and all that. It's all there. But 88 in Seoul looks very different. It looks nothing like 84 and nothing like any other Olympics. And I mentioned Hosuni, the Korean restaurant I used to go to. Hosuni is the name of the girlfriend of Hodori, the tiger mascot. You can still see playing all the sports on the wall at the station I transferred at this morning, Dongdaemun History and Culture Park. I think it is in English. I actually met the creator of Hodori recently, Kim Hyun, graphic designer. And he, it's funny. You think of the type of celebrities you could meet, and somehow that was the one I was nervous about. I gave him a copy of 한국 요약 금지 after he signed my book of his, and my hand was sort of shaking. I was not signing it legibly, just because why are you so nervous to meet this guy? This is an old man who made a tiger for the Olympics. He made Gumdori for the Daejeon Expo. You might know that mascot with the big feet, the yellow guy. Anyway, this is a guy so involved in Korean history. I have his anthology of works of his graphic design studio, and his work touched pretty much everything that happened from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s in Korea. The look of Korea and many of the looks that are becoming revived as Newtro, he made. And so that might have been part of it. I was just like, oh, this guy is he really is the embodiment of one strain of Korean history that has appealed to me for so long. And, we chatted for just a few minutes, but I feel like I brushed up against, a creator of this society in a way, or at least a reflector of it.
He features, I'm 99% sure this is the same gentleman, having not met him. He features in Lee Tae-young director's documentary on the 88 Olympics that he did for KBS.
I'd be surprised if he didn't, yeah.
And in that, he tells a story. Lee Tae-young is fabulous. He does a modern career, and it's recommend watching his stuff. He's on this podcast, maybe about episode 12. The designer features in that documentary, getting back to the story, and he says originally he designed the mascot for the 88 Olympics to be a rabbit, because you've seen the image of the rabbit representing the Korean peninsula.
Right.
Chun Doo-won came in and said, we are not a rabbit, we are a tiger.
We are a tiger, yes.
And so that's why the mascot was a tiger.
The state would interfere in those days, as you well know. I mean, even with Seonsanga, the building, which is by Kim Soo-gun, an architect, the most famous Korean architect of those days, one whose work always interests me, but he disowned that building because of so much interference. It was nothing like the plans he made, and part of it from the state, part of it from elsewhere. But, in those days, 60s, 70s, 80s, no one's vision could be cleanly brought into reality just because of what the state wanted. to happen. We're a tiger. This is what we are. So, if you could get a tiger for us.
It's only when you get to people like Sotaji, and he was releasing songs and the government would say, you can't release these lyrics because they criticize our society. And he said, well, then please print my song as an instrumental without the lyrics. He was one of the first people to sort of put up a middle finger.
And he's still that way to an extent. I think he's always been about seeing how far you can push expression in Korea. Can you say the unsayable? Because he knows exactly what the unsayable is, which is important too. I mean, we talked about Park Chan-wook. He did an interview with Ian Baruma like 25 years ago, and he was willing to explain exactly what a film cannot say in Korea. There are certain things that you can say in books, not in movies, because they're just, I guess, too powerful or were considered to be too powerful. And this wasn't the case of state repression in 2003 or whenever it was. It just, people know what they can't say here. And you still kind of see it happening. You see the gears turning in their minds sometimes. Like, how close am I getting to the line? Because there's always a line.
You might like this or you might find it interesting or not, but I teach courses in Hallyu, and it's my job to teach sort of K-culture. My students first start learning about Baek Namjoon.
Yes.
And then they learn about Sotaji, and then they learn about Park Chan-wook. And they're like, Professor, where's Jungkook? Like, where are the TikToks? Where are the live streams?
Well, he's a little later.
Yeah, but it's about these people that broke the system or refused. And I just want to love bomb Park Chan-wook, and because you mentioned him again, that he did a movie, JSA, his first big feature, which was
the first Korean movie I ever saw.
About promoting brotherly love between South Koreans and North Koreans. And then his next movie was about incest. And then in 2006, he did a movie about mental health amongst women. He did one about lesbians. He's done one about Japanese colonization and like suicide.
Yeah, he touches on all the big subjects.
What an amazing, powerful creature. It's
an artistic instinct to know what you can't say, but also how you can say that, how close you can get, and in what way you can convey a view about this forbidden subject. I think obviously there are not as many forbidden subjects in Korea as there used to be, which might be one reason why the film culture is not seen as vital as it once was. The taboos are, for better or for worse, breaking down. And that's, maybe one thing that we're both witnessing in Korea now is, what holds the society together when the taboos are not as strong as they used to be. People might think, obviously, Korea is going to be a united society because of its ethnic homogeneity. I don't think it's enough. Especially, Koreans joke about themselves. Like, you get 3 Koreans together, they form 5 political parties. This is not a united society.
My party, your party, and our party.
At least, at the very least. So there are certain, and that's part of where these taboos come from. Why it's difficult to discuss history sometimes is it's seen as load-bearing. These certain ideas hold South Korea together and keep people united. And if you question them, we could have a problem. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it's an idea that exists and has existed.
In Taboos, I teach my other students about Park No-hye, the dissident poet. I'm not sure if you're aware of him. 새벽의 노동의 새벽, The Dawn of Labor, originally published in 1984 and recently translated by Chi-hyung Harrison Kim and Brother Anthony into English. And for writing a book of poems, which is essentially just about the working class, it's not sort of Rage Against the Machine, burn down the state. He was sentenced to life in prison, and people clamored for the death penalty for this gentleman. And so I do ask my students, what book could you write today that would get you put in jail for life?
Yes, purely it's an interesting question.
Purely for writing words on a page, not for inciting violence, not for committing acts of offense, but for writing certain words in a certain order, making certain scribbles on a piece of tree. What could you do? Because he found it.
Right,
and maybe that represented more about the government's position at the time. And it was 1991 he was given
it was 1991. In that same year, I think of the obscenity trial of Ma Kwang-soo. You might know of him. This is another cultural figure foreigners aren't supposed to know about. But Ma Kwang-soo is a writer, was a Korean writer whose work I like from what I've read. And he wrote a novel called 즐거운 Sara, or Happy Sara, which because of its depictions of sex was put on trial, and he was perp walked with his hands tied up in 1991. Like it's a
3 years after becoming democracy. Yeah,
this is a Lady Chatterley's lover situation in the 90s in Korea. And you read the book today, and it's like nothing. A webtoon is more salacious than Chulgon Sara. But he was always pushing boundaries too, in many ways. And I've always had the sort of dream since I've known of him of translating his work, whether fiction or nonfiction. He wrote a lot of different things. I was introduced to him through a book called 나는 야한 여자가 좋다. I'll leave it untranslated for now.
I like filthy women.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Is that how you would translate?
I mean, you could say I like loose women. There's many words possible. My wife found that in a bookstore, and she's like, "Oh, you'd like this." And so, and indeed, the book is not pornographic. He has essays about growing up in Uljiro, and like how it used to be. A lot of it is very tame. I mean, or not even with the intent to titillate, but he had that personality of the sort of dirty old man, no doubt about it. And I have thought, I could translate him, and there'd be a good story behind it and everything. But his living relatives, I think his older sister, not only she prevents all reprints of his work from happening.
Wow.
You can't find a new book of his. It's just been like cut off. The supply is cut off, and he still gets written about. And on the 10th anniversary of his death next year, I might write something as well, maybe to get the machine going again. But it's a shame that I've inquired, and it's always the same. Like, I don't think she's going to let a translation. I mean, if you can't reprint his work in Korea, getting it abroad is a much trickier strategy. I mean, part of me just says, go ahead and translate it. Like, you could just put it up. Like, you could just do it and see what happens. Push the envelope a bit.
Just on a blog as a personal exercise in language or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe I will. What's the worst that could happen?
It goes to show just how conservative this country is at times, but also how much it's changing. When you mentioned things being salacious and sexy, when I saw the Minyo performance, I mean, that was incredibly suggestive and innuendo.
Yes.
I found myself thinking this is like a pantomime watching on the English seaside with all the ladies clapping at the suggestive jokes and dick humor and things like this, and the ambiguity of I grew up with Dame Edna Everage and cross-dressing and that kind of things, and that was exactly what these characters were doing. And,
it's context. Context is very important. These performers know what the right context is. And they know who their audience is, and that can change with the context. But part of me sometimes thinks, despite being, I wouldn't object to being described as a free speech extremist, as I know Brian Myers calls himself. But at the same time, I realize a repressive regime, be it political or social, does generate a certain creativity and expression. You can, much of the art that we still admire was created under what we would think of as just insufferably strict conditions, whether it be what was not socially approved or what the government would crack down on. A lot of the Korean films or music or literature we like was produced under those conditions. And in a way, it has more of that frisson than what's made today when so many rules are lifted. I'm no fan of political correctness, but if you're in a world of political correctness, when you can violate that in a creative way, it's a lot more interesting than if it's a free-for-all. I admit that.
It was Jack White who I first heard say that in the White Stripes, a band he did that featured just two musicians, he limited himself to two instruments, him and Meg White, with three colors, and just one guitar, because it was that limitations that spurred creativity. And if you can do everything, and if you have every tool at your disposal, you get nowhere. But he enjoyed those limitations. He thought it was very important from the creative thing.
And you still remember them for that reason. It brings an image to mind, even if you didn't listen to them. I didn't really, but I still I remember who they were for that reason. And thinking of Newtro, this is part of the appeal, I think. Part of the meryok is, I have a section on logos. And when the Newtro wave really has come up, it sort of late 2010s onward, then the corporations, the brands got into it. And the ones who had old logos from the 60s, 70s, 80s brought those logos back. Or the ones who had never stopped using those logos foregrounded them and made like apparel, jackets with them. Gompyo, the flower brand, the literal bear mark, the bear became an icon. they brought these logos back, and I'm thinking, why do I like them? Why do I like these logos more than current corporate logos, current brands, which I can't even bring to mind a brand logo from Korea now. I mean, the Kia logo redesign is no good, I would say. I mean, we're in an era of bad redesigns in general, but why are the old ones more fun? Why are they more appealing? Why do they have this meryok? And I realize it's because of that, because they were produced under straightened conditions. They didn't have many colors to work with. They couldn't make them very big. They had to make them eye-catching and charming with barely anything to work with. And so the new wave of Newtro logos imitates the constraints, these sort of little circular designs with minimum colors possible and the sort of shading with dots and lines and mascots that have to be sort of round and with easily readable expressions. Even the Olympics mascot, Hodori, was... He was created in the mid-'80s and with all of the graphic design constraints that applied at that time. And you remember him more than the more recent type. Who were the 2018? Ban something. And this goes to show you.
White, wasn't it? It was
there was a white and a
black
black one.
Yeah.
I liked Suhorang.
That sounds correct. Yeah.
I liked them, but they don't have the iconic value of Hodori. Let's face it. And the old there's a Yontan, speaking of Newtro, a Yontan gogichip. They grill meat with the old Yontan charcoal bricks. Yeah. And their sign has a row of old corporate logos, old brand logos, Jillo and Lotte and Bingure and one other one. I think a few were in that book. A few were in my book. And, they're charming whenever I walk by them. And it's because not just that they're evocative of the past, which is a past I didn't live through here anyway, but that they, again, use the constraints fruitfully. And if you can succeed under constraint, then you've got something that will endure.
This, just thinking about how young people react, and because what I want to come to is the day-to-day application of Newtro, which is a word that many people might not be familiar with, but how it resonates in the daily life. In one of my courses with Korean students, every week we watch a movie together, and I find it fabulous that I just get paid to watch movies
once a week.
But no, that's what we do for the entire course.
I see.
And the two recent movies we watched were Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel. And
okay.
Some students said, that's the best movie I've ever seen. And other students said, what the hell is that? And then last week we watched Lyon.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Hugely beloved movie in Korea.
But none of them had ever seen it. These are young people. Okay?
I guess that wave is over. I haven't seen a Leon phone case in a while. I had one myself.
Right. And this is at a women's university, I'm showing, with all the relationships going on in that movie.
Yeah.
And what surprised me, it just caught me, is that the students said to me, I love the nostalgia of this movie.
The nostalgia.
When we watched Leon, by the way, nobody left the room.
Mm-hmm.
They sat there and they watched it from beginning to end, and that fascinated me because I can gauge attention levels, and they're all generally very good. But on that one, nobody left. They were gripped. Some were watching it from behind their iPad screens because they were unnerved by Gary Oldman's performance. But they said to me, I love the nostalgia. And I was like, yeah, but in the 90s, this wasn't nostalgia.
Yeah, it was not.
It was,
well, it had a little bit of
elements of it, but it's not, it wasn't hinting at this 50s or 60s at the time.
It wasn't. I do like about that movie, I like the cross-culturality of it in the sense of he's reconstructing or trying to reconstruct a certain vision of New York, but obviously shooting it in Paris, which is entertaining in itself. Like that's fruitful in its own way.
And he's got a Frenchman playing in Italian.
Yeah. This is, it's a jampung, you could say in Korean. But these students were all Korean, I take it.
All Korean. Well, I had one Turkish in there.
Koreans love Leon, especially young women. And there are many things you could speculate on thematically there, but it's like Demian, Hermann Hesse's novel. People, I just couldn't, when I first came here, I just was hearing references to Demian more than I'd ever heard in the US. I was aware of the book, I'd never read it. So I read it when I came here to better understand Korea, but the narratives of this sort of older figure, older experienced figure bringing a younger inexperienced one from their closed world out into the real world is such a resonant theme here. You can almost always succeed with it. Yeah. And this, I've read many explanations and speculated myself, but I do think a lot of people here feel like they're in a tightly controlled environment, especially growing up, and they don't even realize they can be brought out of it, but have this kind of latent desire for somebody to do that for them. And so reading these books or seeing these movies that dramatize that so vividly, I think is very appealing for a lot of people here.
It's the awakening of individualization or individualism. And I've often speculated that I think that's quite young in this country. Not to say that there haven't been individuals, but the idea of na na na. And this is what I think, and this is what I'm going to do. And because we pride that elsewhere. And for the longest time, I mean, I've been here during the rise of Honbap and Honsul. And that was, you know, David, have you tried eating by yourself?
Yes,
like,
well, I'm
I do it all the time, you know, this is what happens. I did want to ask you this about Newtro, that I think people online will see Newtro, they'll see pictures of reading books by the Changechan. And quiet libraries, and this will come up as a topic of media. Who is it? Who's consuming it? Do you get an idea of, because we know who's producing the Newtro, but who's consuming it? Is it feminine? Is it masculine? Is it rich and poor? Because when I went to that Minyo performance, Minyo is like people's music, and it's folk music. It's music of the working class, and I kept asking myself, imagine what it would be like to watch this in the 1700s under the burning April sun, drunk on Macaulay.
Yes.
After working in the fields, you know, without the air conditioning and but what I experienced at the National Theatre was a collection of modern yangban.
Yes.
Very rich, affluent, educated people watching a performance of, or at least an idea of what used to be.
Right.
And
an idea of the past.
Yeah, the high watching the low. And so when we talk about Newtro today, how is it? Do you see it played out in audience?
Well, it's a cultural phenomenon, and it's a design and marketing trend. So automatically you think, well, it's going to be mostly women, right? I'm sure you've seen this. Whenever anything new comes around in Korea, usually if it's something that comes from elsewhere, if a sort of new wave of foreign restaurants appears or a new style of cafes, whatever it is, you go there and it'll be 95% women.
Maratang and Heidi Lau.
Yeah, I mean, that's all of it.
Went huge.
And I think a lot of times in Korea, the men are content to do what they've always done. And it's the women who keep wanting to try new things. And so I would guess if you're really selling something on a Newtro basis, you want to target the women first, because they're the ones who are going to bite that hook more so than the men, even though not everything is targeted explicitly toward women that I've seen that's really trying to capitalize on Newtro. But if you can't do that, I think you do struggle in Korea. Anything cultural, anything that's seen as a new cultural wave, it is female first here. And as you say, your students are women, so you see this a lot firsthand, I'm sure. But even the word Newtro itself, I don't know how much the word is getting used these days.
Y2K comes a lot, I hear.
Y2K?
In spoken English.
As a evocation of that era?
Oh, I like Y2K vibes.
It's funny, getting...
I haven't heard the word Newtro too much, but even if the students see Leon or Nirvana or something that I'm exposing them to, even Michael Jackson in Hallyu classes, they'll say, I like the Y2K. It's
funny. That's become a phenomenon in the West, I think, as well. It's a byword. And we mentioned that I was interested in 80s pop culture when I was growing up in the 90s. And now, like, thinking of Y2K as a historical era, it's kind of funny. And it's like, I remember an article came out in like 2016 saying, the year 2000 is officially retro, whether you like it or not. And it really makes sense because it had a look, and a look I didn't like at the time. The sort of turn of the millennium, this like glossiness, but it seemed kind of empty. Everything had this sickly sheen at the time, I thought. Looking back, though, I realized, that aesthetic, was an aesthetic, so that's interesting. There was a dominant aesthetic, but it was techno-optimistic and also fun, which is not quite what you get these days. Techno-optimism exists, but it's not. More so here in Korea than in the West, I can tell you.
We love AI. The universities, they've got AI lectures all over the place.
They've gone too far, and I wouldn't be surprised if I wake up one day and there's 50 million cases of AI psychosis surrounding me in this country. Koreans sometimes ask when I give book talks, you say in 한국 교약 금지 that Koreans are more positive about the future than Americans. How could that be? And I always say, well, it has to do with technology. I think I got that because Koreans embrace technology as it comes in a way that Americans either don't or are hesitant to. Smartphones. Look at how quickly those were adopted here. I bet you know people in England who still don't have one. And they're getting them, but grandma is not in line for the latest Galaxy. Or you mentioned AI, there's that. And so the society plunges into things here.
Yeah. Head first. And sometimes that causes problems. But if any society can plunge out of the problem, it's probably South Korea as well. Obama once said something about the U.S. being like a big ocean liner that's hard to turn. You can't turn it much. This is more of a speedboat in South Korea. You can, for better or for worse, make a sharp turn. And I think you've seen in your time here, the society's made a few sharp turns, and it'll make some more, I suspect. Ho Hwa-pyong, same man from the 88 documentary, who's quite a reviled figure for his role in Gwangju and Chun Doo-won's regime. He said, Korea has always gone in head first because we don't have any other choice. So there might be the size that and I think that's a very interesting analogy. The United States being a cruise ship that's hard to turn, South Korea is more mobile, but it also has that existential push to it that it needs to survive, and it's gone through this kind of existential crises, and that we have to seek, we have to chase, otherwise we will simply be swamped. And if we can get there first, if we can do something, we have a first mover's advantage.
Yeah, the fast follower. I always think there's something unfortunate, though, that tends always to be about imitating something they've seen done in another country. And I emphasized this when I was giving interviews about the first book. I was saying, because Slavoj Žižek lived in Korea for a year. Did you know that?
I knew he was associated with Beyonce, but I didn't know he lived here.
I think it was probably pretty off and on. But when he was here, he was saying, I won't try to do the accent, but he was saying...
Just rub your nose a bit.
Everybody's asking me, oh, please, Professor Žižek, tell us how to run the country. He's like, I've barely been here. I don't know. Why is everybody asking me how to run the country? And this phenomenon happens in Korea. There's this, I guess it's a tradition of just, here's a wise man. What should we do? Especially if that wise man is from abroad, or even if they're not that wise. So I'd get a lot of journalists here asking, what advice do you have for Korea? And one thing I would say is, I think the time to find solutions abroad is probably over. What Korea should do to improve, the answer is not in the US or Japan. It's not you remember a few years ago, more than a few, I guess, when the founder of Oh My News went around the world looking for the most happy country so that Korea could imitate it. And he found Denmark, which is, I've been to Denmark, and I don't know if happy is the word. Anyway, the idea was we should find the happiest country because we are unhappy, and then just do what they do. That mindset works to a degree, but it has its limits, and I think Korea has run up against those limits. So what I would say in these interviews is, the answer is here. The answer is within. You're going to have to look within. Korea can invent things. That's not impossible. A good idea can come from Korea. It doesn't have to be from abroad. It doesn't have to be from some nebulous Sonjin-guk. And Korea itself, as I'm always emphasizing in Korean, is in many ways more developed than the US, certainly. So Korea may be better at giving the lessons than taking them at this point. And, if you want to move forward, maybe there's no one to imitate. Maybe you're up front, which is scary. But you're going to have to, the head first plunging, sometimes it's just, you have to plunge into something that no one else has plunged into. But I think that this is something that bears repeating. The way forward for Korea has to be found within. And it's not going to be, are you going to look to the US now? Are you going to look to England? Are you going to look to Japan? These are all countries that I think when Koreans visit them these days, they are disappointed. They think, this is not what I expected. But, and then they come back and say, oh, it's not so bad. It's not so bad in Korea after all. And that's one thing that going abroad helps with. Koreans are huge travelers, as you know. And to get a perspective on Korea, sometimes, or I think without exception, you have to see it from outside. You have to go experience another country and understand the other country's strengths and weaknesses. And then you can see Korea's, and you don't automatically dismiss everything from where you're from as being sort of over familiar or worn out because you've seen how the rest of the world is.
I think that's beautiful, Colin. I think that's where I would like to leave this conversation, because I want people to reflect on what you've just said. And I think it sums up everything you've done about your book, about how what is Korean shouldn't be 촌스러워, but it can be 멋지다. I think that's very true. And to look within and have courage and realize that this is a 선진국, a developed country that can lead the way. Ladies and gentlemen, for those watching and listening, thank you for your support. Please check out Colin. He's got books in English and Korean. You can find him online. There's lots of interesting content perspectives and the occasion going viral with tweets. Highly recommended. For the Patreon people that support, always appreciated. For everyone else, do please do those things like click subscribe, and we will see you again next time. Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks for
Colin.
having me back.
Good.
Well done.